Late at night, along the river, shrouded in fog, a small boat floated in which a man was sitting. He rowed with all his strength and sweat streamed down his face, but he continued to swim. He thought that the poison had already spread throughout his body, that very little time would pass, and he was about to lose consciousness. But he needs to make every effort to get to Handong as soon as possible. He took out of his pocket a golden tablet, on which was an image of a flying eagle. Suddenly a scream was heard in the fog. Someone shouted that they had finally caught up with him, and the man saw the vague silhouette of a boat. A large ship was sailing towards him, at the stern of which people were standing and looking at him. One of them leaned on the railing with his sharp golden claw-tipped hand and exclaimed that he was surprised when he saw how far the man could get. It was the woman who invited him to surrender and said that his resistance would end here. The man stood up to his full height and shouted at her to shut up, and he would never give up. From the tension, blood gushed from his mouth and he started coughing violently. The poison began to take effect. The woman noted that the fugitive had put in a lot of effort, and now it must be painful for him to even move. He just needs to accept his fate, and Mr. Jucho promised to find him a place if he voluntarily comes to him to confess. The man called the woman a traitor, and regretted that she was so hungry for power. To which the woman replied that people only adapt to the situation, the world is changing, and now the era of Mr. Jucho has come. The Surazo squad that the man loved so much no longer exists. The man clutched the sign in his hands, hid it, and told the woman that if she had even a drop of affection left for her old colleague, she would not treat him like that. With these words, he broke the bottom of his boat with his foot. Pieces of wood and huge streams of water flew into the air, and the man was enveloped in a blue light. The woman was speechless, and covered her face with her sleeve from the flying debris. "This is my answer," the man roared, collecting a huge ball in his hand from the streams of power that came from him, and threw this ball into the ship of those who were pursuing him. The ball smashed the deck of the enemy boat. The woman was surprised that the one they were pursuing still had so much strength left. She did not pay attention to the cries of the wounded, but got down to business. She immediately gave orders for her servants to kill the man because the negotiations had broken down anyway. And the warriors rushed into the attack, which the man prepared to repel. Kon Kingdom, Namha Province. A small rural house stands behind a low fence, with a large tree growing nearby. Everything is very peaceful and cozy. The door slowly opens and someone tiptoes across the yard, trying not to wake up anyone from the household. But he is overtaken by a terrible scream. "Where are you going?" And the person understands that he has been exposed. The village boy Jin Beck turns and sees his sister. Jinbaek's little sister, whose name is Midan, asks indignantly whether her brother decided to sneak away again when his grandfather told him to stay at home. The boy tries to lie to his sister that he is running to the funeral of a friend's father, but the girl remembers that it was last month. Does his friend really have several fathers who die all the time? "We need to do as grandfather tells us," says the sister, and the boy thinks about how to persuade her to let him go outside. He remembers that yesterday, a very nice mirror was sold at the market, and tells his sister that he can buy it for her. He also promises to buy her caramel, and his sister begins to doubt. Finally, she gives him 3 hours to go about his business and come back. Jinbaek immediately runs away. He runs without making out the road and runs into something very hard. The boy falls, clutches his bruised nose, and a gray-haired man leans over him. A menacing old man, armed with a staff from which power emanates, looks at the boy with indignation. The boy understands that he has stumbled upon his grandfather, and retribution for disobedience is inevitable. The grandfather is very angry that his grandson went outside when he was ordered to stay at home. He tells his grandson that if he doesn't want to sit at home, then he needs to do what his grandfather does, that is, hunt. The grandson doesn't want to hunt and asks his grandfather if he never had a dream. Grandfather grabs a stick and punishes his grandson. He asks who he picked up such thoughts from. Is it really from his friend Bekbong? Late in the evening, Jinbaek goes out to the riverbank and sadly thinks that his grandfather is very strict and does not understand that his grandson is no longer a small child. He is unbearably bored. He was born in this village but wants to live an amazing life. For example, study martial arts and become a strong warrior on the black horse, wrapped in the skin of a wild beast. He would travel the world and catch all sorts of scoundrels, for which he would receive his fame, and his name would remain in history. Or he could meet a woman in trouble, then he would easily defeat the scoundrel. And a woman would ask him, "Incredible knight, what is your name? I beg you to tell me this is the desire of my life." And he would modestly say that his name means nothing, but it was his duty to tell her. That his name is the fire dragon of the Jinbaek heavenly army. He believed so much in what he himself had just come up with that he joyfully jumped to his feet and shouted that this was the beginning of the great Jinbaek warrior. At this time, the wind raised a wave, and the water splashed right into the Jinbaek's face. He was completely wet, and immediately all his illusions dissipated. He was left standing wet on the deserted shore. Suddenly his eyes widened. He saw something that amazed him. A body was washed ashore by a wave. It was the corpse of a man. Jinbaek was horrified by what he saw, and could not understand whether he was seeing it in reality or in a dream. In the deceased's pocket, a gold plate glittered. In the royal palace, numerous courtiers were standing outside the king's bedroom when a man entered. He was very domineering, and with all his appearance he showed impatience and irritation. In a loud voice, he called the king, was surprised that he had not yet woken up, and shouted that he could not sleep when such a mess was going on in the country. The courtiers were horrified, and did not understand what was happening. One of the courtiers turned to the chancellor, and said that despite the fact that the chancellor is a high-ranking official who assists the ruler in the administration of state affairs, no one is allowed to enter His Majesty's bedroom. The chancellor grabbed the courtier's head with an iron hand and lifted him off the ground. The courtier was choking and could not utter a word, and the chancellor turned red with anger and said that only an insolent person could dare to raise his voice at him and tell him what he can and cannot do. Swinging with all his might, the chancellor threw the unfortunate courtier against the wall, and he slid to the floor with a broken head. The chancellor entered the king's bedroom and saw a figure wrapped in a blanket. He turned to the king with the words that His Majesty's health was deteriorating day by day, and this greatly worried the chancellor. He advised the king to go to the south for a while to heal. He did not need to worry about affairs in the country. After all, since the reign of the last king, the chancellor has been sacrificing himself and will do everything for the sake of the kingdom of Han and his subjects. The courtiers bowed low so as not to meet the chancellor's gaze, and heard the king's faint whisper, "I understand, so be it." And in the village life goes on as usual, and the grandfather again scolds his grandson. This brat again did not spend the night at home, and grandfather decides not to give him any concessions this time. The grandson shouts that he just fell asleep on the seashore, and the grandfather is sure that his grandson got into a fight with someone again. Jinbaek runs away from his grandfather and thinks that in no case can he say that he found a body on the shore that night, because if he says this, he will get even more trouble. Finally, the grandfather got tired and demanded that his grandson come to him. He took the meat of the deer that his grandfather had hunted to the butcher's shop and carefully counted the money. The grandson asks him a question: why can't grandfather go himself? But grandfather takes on such a threatening look that Jinbaek quickly runs to the butcher. In the center of the village there are many people and many different shops. Lively life is in full swing on the streets. Butcher pays Jinbaek and advises him not to create problems and return home quickly. Jinbaek realizes that he can buy himself a treat and a mirror for his sister Madan. Suddenly he notices a large number of people looking at something. He pushes through the crowd to see what happened, and sees an old man lying on the ground and next to him a small crying child. There are two people standing nearby. One is a huge thug, the other is shorter than him, and there seems to be some kind of conflict going on between them. The thug advises the man not to poke his nose into other people's affairs and go his own way. The thug's friends say that this man is not local, and they don't know what kind of guy he is. People around feel sorry for the man who does not know that these hooligans are very cruel and got involved in this matter in vain. The man draws his sword, but people doubt that he can fight against 5 at once. The man says that he does not need a sword to deal with such pathetic scoundrels that surrounded him. The hooligans rush at the man all together from different sides to show him who is boss. With a quick movement, the man clenches his hand into a fist, instantly moves to the other side, and leaves the hooligans to fight with the empty space. The hooligans cannot understand where the one they were about to attack went to, and suddenly a series of precise blows fall on them all from behind. Jinbaek, like all people, is amazed at how deftly the stranger can fight. The man calmly leaves, leaving the unconscious hooligans behind him. The spectators did not even have time to notice how the man moved. They all wonder how he did it and begin to fear him. One Jinbaek thinks it's amazing. He's absolutely delighted with what he just saw. The man moves away and thinks about what pitiful people got in his way. Jinbaek catches up with him and starts asking questions about whether it's true that these were martial arts and not from walls whether a stranger came. The man says nothing and continues on his way, but Jinbaek runs around him and pesters with questions. Here his legs are entangled one against the other, and with the words, "I see the master for the first time," the boy falls right in front of the stranger. The man is speechless and stops. From pockets Jinbaek, when falling, a bunch of coins and a golden tablet that he found on the body fall out dead men. The stranger saw something, and a silent question appeared in his eyes. He looks intently at the golden tablet in his hands. Jinbaek rises with an apology and invites the stranger to have dinner at their home. But then a strong hand grabs him by the throat and the boy begins to choke. The stranger broke the silence and his first words were, "What are you up to, puppy? Where did you get this thing from?" The boy doesn't even understand what this man is asking him about. The stranger says that he is interested in the sign that the boy hid in his home and where he got it from. Jinbaek screams that he didn't hide anything, that the stranger can take the sign, and calls for help, unable to escape from the strong hands of the man. The man thinks that in front of him is a pathetic brat, but he cannot leave him just like that, because with a powerless weak boy he could never defeat the elder. So he shows him the sword and demands to tell him the whole truth, and if he catches the boy in a lie, he will kill him. Frightened Jinbaek tells him that he found a body by the sea. An angry man demands details, asks what that man looked like, what he was wearing. Jinbaek says the deceased was about 40 years old, and on his forehead he had a scar in the shape of the letter X. The stranger unclenches his hand and Jinbaek maybe finally inhale air. The man asks him what he did with the body. Buried in the windfall forest, the boy answers, and the man demands to take him there immediately. A woman with white hair stands on the bank of the river and looks at the water. The soldiers address her and call her Mrs. Shinny. She asks if they found the body. The soldiers answer that they examined everything but found no traces. Shinny thinks that the body must have been thrown somewhere here, but they searched the area and found nothing, which means he could have survived. She orders every corner of the village to be searched, and the soldiers run to carry out the order. At this time, in the windfall forest, Jinbaek showed the grave where he buried the body. The stranger is shocked by this news. He grieves and his face is distorted with grief. The boy makes excuses and explains that when he found it, he didn't know what to do and that's why he buried it here. A stranger falls sobbing on the elder's grave. His fingers scratch at the ground in impotent rage. He swears that he will fight. The Jucho needs to get ready because the man promises to see his blood no matter what, and he will never back down until that happens. Jinbaek remembers that he heard the name Jucho before, but he doesn't remember where and when. Thanks to the elder for training him, the man continues to sob at the grave and apologizes that I misunderstood him. Finally, he gets up and is about to leave, paying his last debt to his elder. Jinbaek tries to stop him and asks that is he really going to just leave, and the man wonders if there is something else he should see. Jinbaek says that he can no longer show anything new, but the sun is already setting. It's getting late. If the gentleman has not decided where to spend the night, he can stay in Jinbaek's house. The man initially wants to refuse, citing a large number of cases, but the Jinbaek does not listen to him and is already walking towards his house, inviting the guest to follow him. He happily thinks that this is a great chance for him to learn martial arts. The stranger decides to spend the night in the boy's house and follows him, not noticing that someone is watching them from behind a tree. On the riverbank, Shinny scolds the soldiers for not finding anything, and does not understand how they could not complete such a simple task. At this time, another soldier comes running to the shore who says that he has news for Mrs. Shinny. He didn't find the one Shinny wanted to see, but he found Handong. These words make Shinny's eyes widen. She did not expect to hear such news. It turns out that they were looking for copper and found gold. Luck did not turn away from them. In the house, grandfather and Madan were sitting near the fireplace and preparing for dinner. Suddenly, a Jinbaek ran into the house and said that they had guests today and needed to prepare an extra portion of food. Madan did not expect to see anyone and was very surprised that a tall, unfamiliar man was standing on the threshold, and the Jinbaek told her that this was the one who would teach him martial arts. The grandfather looked carefully and appraisingly at the stranger who came to their house. He noted the man's tall stature and broad shoulders and the sword in his hands. He asked the guest if he was by chance connected with Murim, and the guest confirmed the guess. Then the grandfather jumped up and sharply told the guest to leave his house immediately. Jinbaek was shocked and tried to stop his grandfather. He said that it was not appropriate to behave this way, because he was just a guest, and grandfather shouted that he would not tolerate such guests in his house. The stranger calmly said that his arrival had nothing to do with Murim. He came only because he was offered a place to stay for the night. Since it was already dark outside, grandfather thought, and allowed us to spend the night in his house today, but tomorrow morning the stranger must leave. Handong looks closely at the old man and sees a huge scar on his chest. He immediately determines that this is a mark of spilled blood, and he himself finds it difficult to believe it. This mark means that the person used martial arts, and that means the old man is also associated with Murim. The boy happily goes and shows the guest the room in which he will spend the night. And on the way he says that his name is Jin Beck, but what should he call his guest? The guest replies that their paths will soon diverge, so there is no point in naming names. Jinbaek takes it for granted, apologizes for what happened, and explains that grandfather hates Murim. But personally he is very interested in martial arts. And before the guest leaves, could he show Jinbaek something? Because his dream is to learn martial arts and leave his name in the history of this world. Turns out to be Murim for you. Is this simple pampering? The guest suddenly asks the boy sharply. Jinbaek doesn't understand what his guest is talking about and wants him to explain what he meant. Here a desperate scream is heard from the house. It is his sister screaming and calling her grandfather and brother for help. Jinbaek and his guest quickly run to find out what is happening. They burst into the house and their eyes see a picture that they did not expect to see. Shinny is sitting in the room and tells Handong that they haven't seen each other for a long time. And the soldier covers Madan's mouth. At the sight of his sister, who is in such a helpless position, Jinbaek becomes furious, and one thought flashes through his head. Who are these people? He shouts to the soldiers to let his sister go and rushes at them. The soldier draws his saber and is ready to attack in order to kill the boy who dared to attack them. Jinbaek is lost, doesn't know what to do. The saber is about to cut him down. At this moment, his grandfather, shouting, "Jinbaek," pushes his grandson away, taking him out of the attack. The old man is wounded instead of his grandson. The impact sends him flying far to the side. Jinbaek runs to his grandfather, asks how he is, and Handong looks intently at Shinny. With the last of his strength, the grandfather whispers to his grandson to run away as quickly as possible. Handong tells Jinbaek to follow his grandfather's advice, and he will deal with everything himself. There's no place for children here, Handong explains to Jinbaek, and he himself looks intently at the enemies who surrounded them. He explains that if something goes wrong, the Jinbaek could die. Handong asks the woman what she forgot here. Shinny replied that they were looking for traces of Bibuchi, but found Handong, which is also very good. She wonders where Handong met Bibuchi, and whether they were looking for Jade together. The woman puts the frightened Madan forward, and says that if the Handong doesn't tell anything, then she will force him to do it. The child's life depends on his answer, and Shinny puts his sharp claw to the girl's throat. Handong tells her that since this matter concerns only the two of them, the girl needs to be released, and the issue should be resolved without her. Shinny says that she doesn't want to let the girl go, but if he wants to, he'll have to answer all her questions. With these words, she pushes the girl forward and leaves 4 deep cuts on her back from her claws. Kanduna is overcome with anger and begins to shout at the cruel woman. And the Jinbaek, without hesitation for a second, runs to help his sister. Handong draws his sword and attacks the Shinny. He hopes to deal her a fatal blow and end everything at once, but she deftly dodges his sword, laughs, and says that this is where she should have started, after which he attacks the Handong with his deadly claws. Red and blue flames collide together with such force that their light is visible far beyond the village. The fighters bounce off each other, and the Shinny says with delight that her opponent is still as strong, and she remembers the good old days. She invites her opponent to talk seriously, but does not have time to finish the sentence. How the Handong instantly moves behind her and attacks her with a sword from a completely different place. Shinny cannot understand where her opponent has gone. She turns, her face contorted with rage, towards the Handong, repels his blows while simultaneously delivering his own. Rivals move at breakneck speed and try to inflict serious wounds on each other. The soldiers shout to their mistress that they are ready to intervene, but she stops them and says that this puppy belongs to her, and only she must kill him. Jinbaek sits by the fence next to his grandfather and cannot believe his eyes when he looks at this fight. He never thought that people could fight like this. The Handong sword leaves behind a stream of blue color. The movement of both fighters is invisible to the eye. Shinny's claws are sharp and deadly, and she wields them masterfully. Handong accuses her of dragging innocent people into their dispute, and Jucho's methods are too dirty. Shinny shouts that he will destroy anyone who gets in the way of Mr. Jucho, including Handong. She swings her hand to inflict severe wounds on him with her claws. Handong raises his sword above his head. He is very angry at the immorality of his rival. A strong blow from the sword forces the woman to quickly jump away, otherwise she may lose her head. But her 2 deadly claws were cut off by a well-aimed blow, which the Handong dealt her. Now her hand is not protected by anything. Having quickly assessed the situation, the insidious woman runs away from the battlefield with huge leaps, knocking down the fence near the house. With a hand that has lost its main weapon, iron claws, she threatens her opponent and says that she wanted to deal with him herself. But she has little time, and a detachment of soldiers, obeying the order of their mistress, rushes at the Handong. Handong assesses the situation and quickly counts the number of soldiers who are attacking him. He understands that if he hesitates, the lives of Jin Beck and Madan will be in jeopardy. The man decides that everything needs to be done very quickly. He draws his sword, and a blue glow of power envelops his hand. The flows of power grow stronger and stronger, and take on bizarre shapes. Shinny looks at all this from the side with horror and indignation, and after a few seconds she understands what her opponent is going to do. She shouts to her soldiers that he is preparing a surprise for them, and they cannot let him finish it. But the soldiers do not have time to run up to the fighter when he uses the dragon's bloody strike, and a huge blue flame takes the shape of a dragon's muzzle with huge teeth and clawed paws, and advances on top of the soldiers, opening his shining mouth. The only thing a shinny can do is shout to his soldiers, "Run!" And she herself is the first to flee, and her soldiers run after her. There is a terrible explosion that destroys all living things in its path. But the shinny with several soldiers managed to escape to a fairly safe distance. She says that just now it was very dangerous. It was supposed to be a transformation attack, but it was not completed and therefore was not completely successful. At this time, blue light begins to flow from under the stones. The woman looks at this in amazement and cannot find an answer to what it means. From such force, the stones explode and fly high up. Shinny follows them with his gaze, and then the stones fall to the ground with the same force, and they bury both the woman and the soldiers who were with her. Handong stands and looks at the results of his strike. Jinbaek stands behind and cannot believe his eyes. He had only heard about such a fight in fairy tales. He looks at the man who stands indestructible like a rock, with a sword in his hands, and understands that this is martial arts. Handong looks at the stone rubble and listens carefully to see if any movement can be heard there. At this time, Medan begins to show signs of life and moans. Handong shouts to Jinbaek to quickly put her down. Together they sit the girl down, and the man touches her wounded back. His hands fill with strength. He brings them to the girl's wounds. Blue flames envelop her. Her face becomes calm and peaceful. Jinbaek looks at all this, cannot believe what he is seeing, and wonders if this is a dream. For the first time in his life, he wonders what if martial arts are like what he just saw. This is not at all beautiful, but it is cruel, bloody, and can harm a large number of people. His grandfather lies unconscious in a very serious condition. The body of one of the soldiers is visible under the stone rubble, and the thought that this is cruel again visits the Jinbaek. The old man comes to his senses for a while. He is all wounded, but his thoughts are only about his granddaughter, and he calls her. Handong calms the old man down and says that his granddaughter is fine. There is no need to worry. He transfers energy to her and draws out the poison that poisoned the shinny's claws. The wounded old man repeats the same thing. "I beg you, save our Medan." At this time, the stones begin to move and a figure crawls out from under them. People look with amazement at the fact that someone can get out from under such a rubble. They see a living and healthy shinny who turns to the Handong and says that his skills were not enough to kill her. She appreciated his attempt and is now putting a new glove with sharp claws on her hand. "If you believe your words, Handong," she continues, "you will be able to save this child. But if you stop treatment for even a minute, then you both may die. Your hands are tied." Green smoke swirls around her hands. She wonders if she really looks so pitiful in the hands of the Handong that he thought he could deal with her with one blow. Poison begins to drip from her claws, and she says that Handong has changed a lot since their last meeting, but she also changed in the same way. With these words, she rushes at the man with her poisonous arms wide open. Khandun sits motionless, and he and the girl are in danger of death. The grandfather understands what danger his granddaughter faces and screams with all his might, "No." But he is too old and injured, so he cannot stop the woman. The loud sound of a gunshot is heard in the yard. It's Jinbaek who shoots the old gun straight at the shinny to kill her on the spot. Shinny throws away the bullet with one hand, which cannot harm her. Jinbaek reloads his gun. He is not going to give up and will protect his sister by any means. Handong shouts at the boy to stop because it is dangerous, but he is unable to interrupt the healing session. Jinbaek takes aim at the dangerous woman again and hopes to hit her with this shot. Shinny spreads his claws, laughs at the boy's naivety, and tells him that he can't handle her with such pampering. She waves her hand. A ring of power envelops her, and the Jinbaek no longer sees where he is aiming. With her enormous strength, the woman sends fragments of stones to the place where the boy is standing. Grandfather realizes that he is about to lose his grandson and lets out a loud scream. Jinbaek lying on the ground under a huge pile of stones that crushed his feet. He does not feel his body and cannot move his legs. He feels severe pain. The boy is in complete despair. He understands that he cannot save his sister, and now this is a terrible woman to deal with them. Shinny says that the brat got what he deserves for meddling where he shouldn't, and heads straight to Medan and Handong, who still can't leave the girl. Medan understands what danger she is in, and what threatens her, and begins to cry. Jinbaek understands that something needs to be done, but his arms and legs do not listen to him, and the gun lies very close. The thought that Medan is in danger makes his hand fill with golden power, and now he can reach for the gun and transfer part of the power to it. Shinny does not suspect anything. She approaches Handong and asks him if he would agree to return with her to Mr. Jucho. If the Handong makes the right choice, she will allow him to heal the girl. She impatiently waits for an answer, and her claw scratches the man's neck, and he begins to bleed. Despite the danger that is so close to him, Handong replies that he would rather die than swear allegiance to this scoundrel Jucho. Shawnee's hand is enveloped in poisonous green smoke. She has made a decision, And with the words goodbye, he prepares to strike a fatal blow. At this moment the shot, which is accompanied by a bright yellow flash, throws the woman away from her victim. Handong and the old man understand perfectly well what this yellow flash means, and the Jinbaek stands firmly on his feet, shrouded in a faint golden glow, and prepares to fire his next shot. His whole posture speaks of his determination to fight to the end and protect his sister, grandfather, and his guest. But suddenly the gun falls out of his hands, and the boy falls to the ground again. Shinny thinks that this brat was able to fill an ordinary gun with energy. This means he is so gifted that only living in the village did not give him the opportunity to develop his abilities. She approaches the boy lying motionless, thinking that this puppy is more dangerous than she thought. And if she doesn't kill him now, it could become a danger to Mr. Jucho. She decides to finish Jinbaek right here and now to eliminate the danger forever. At this time, the old man rises from the ground leaning on a stick and demands that she stop. Overcoming the pain and barely standing on trembling legs, the old man suddenly says that he knows that she is looking for Jade, and let her follow him. There is no divine Jade here, the old man says, looking intently at the Shinny. The woman, just like Handong, is speechless and silently looks at the old man. When the first shock passes, the Shinny attacks the old man with questions about whether she heard a mention of the divine Jade. The old man confirms that he did not hear. She cannot understand how this old man knows about the existence of Jade, begins to suspect that he is talking all sorts of nonsense to save his own skin and the lives of his grandchildren. How can an old man living in such a wilderness know about Jade? The old man looks at her carefully, and at first does not say a word. Then he begins to speak slowly with great effort. He asks his listeners if they know about Dekepsa. Shinny, like Handong, cannot answer anything out of amazement. Then Shinny says that this is a place that was destroyed by a demonic cult several decades ago. And why is grandfather suddenly talking about this now? Because the old man continues, and speaking is very difficult for him. The last survivor of Deheps is Jinchu. These words made both Handong and Shinny speechless, because they expected anything but this. Shinny can't believe what she heard. She heard that every single one of them was killed there, and the evil grandfather is just lying to stall for time. Dehepsa was the second most powerful after Shaolin. This Shinny knows well, and she also knows that no matter how old she is or how old the old man is, but she could never easily defeat an experienced master from Dehepsa. The old man replies that decades ago on that day, he lost his martial arts and reveals his chest covered with scars. This was proof of the oath that we would never interfere in the affairs of Chungwon again, the old man continues. According to legend, Shinseong created 8 divine jade beads, and Dehepsa studied this legend. Even one bead gave its owner powerful power. The research materials, which were called the miracle of the 8 jades, were passed down in the temple from generation to generation. However, after the temple was attacked by a demonic cult, the only person who knows anything about the miracle of the 8 jades is Jinbaek's grandfather. Apparently, Shinny said when she regained the ability to speak, you were talking about Jucho before. It seems you're going to collect and transfer the jades to the chancellor of the kingdom of Hong? The old man could barely move, and his every step was stained with blood. He said that if the chancellor ordered such a thing to his subordinates, he literally made them look for a needle in a haystack. Obviously, no one knows much about these jades. The old man proposed this solution to the problem. He would lead them to the place where the jades were kept if they did not touch his grandchildren. In the old man's opinion, it was a good deal. Shinny thought intensely that if this person knows such details, then most likely he is not lying. In addition, such terrifying power emanates from him, that even Shinny gets chills down her spine and finds it difficult to cope with the fear that grips her more and more. She said that the offer was very tempting, but it was impossible to fully believe it. So she suggested that the old man swallow a special substance, which would give her some guarantees. It was a pill of denigrating sleep. If the one who took it did not keep his word, he would die from pain that resembled insect bites all over his body. She considered this a necessary precaution. If it turns out that the old man was lying to her, then of course his precious grandchildren will be killed. Grandfather swallowed the pill without hesitation, and Shinny swore to him that if he kept his promise, everything would turn out well. Handong was still tied to the girl by the treatment and could not move. Mentally, he scolded himself very much for losing his vigilance and not thinking that Shinny might be alive. The old man turned to the Khandun and asked for forgiveness for treating him so callously and saying too much. He was ashamed. His conscience tormented him. He asked him to take care of the children while he was away, so that the old man could safely take Shinny to the divine jades. Grandfather turned to Jinbaek, who was lying unconscious on the ground, and asked for forgiveness for never revealing the whole truth to him. and wished him to live with dignity even if his grandfather was not around. Shinny followed the old man, finally telling the Handong that she planned to settle scores with him today. But in the end, everything is the will of heaven. Handong looked after them and was silent, because he had nothing to say. Someday our paths will definitely cross, the Shinny said confidently, and left with the old man, leaving the Handong with the children in the courtyard of the house. The sun rose above the village and illuminated the roof of the small house. Jinbaek woke up screaming. He remembered that something terrible had happened the day before, but he didn't know how it ended, and his sister Maiden slept next to him. She was absolutely healthy, and Jinbaek felt real happiness. The boy entered the room and saw a sitting Handong, who was very sad. Handong told him everything that happened from the moment Jinbaek lost consciousness. He did not miss a single detail, and the boy listened to him and did not know whether to believe or not believe what he heard. A man and a boy stood on the bank of the river. The man conveyed the last words of grandfather and his desire for the boy and his sister to live with dignity. Jinbaek asked if everything would be okay with his grandfather. This question worried him most now. Handong said that Jucho wants the power of Jade, and unfortunately, Handong sees no way to resist this. Jinbaek continued to ask what would happen to Grandpa when Jucho got what he wanted, but Handong didn't answer him. The boy's hands clenched into fists from powerless despair. He fell to his knees and began to beg Handong to take him with him, because by meeting this Jucho, he could save his grandfather. The boy said that today, for the first time, having fought with someone from Murim, he felt this. He is a man who will do whatever it takes for his family. It was because of him that Madan suffered, and grandfather went on a dangerous journey. Handong told the boy that it was not his fault, but he continued to insist that he alone was to blame. If he had been stronger or had more skills, he would have been able to save both his sister and grandfather. Bitter tears rolled down Jinbaek's face. Therefore, he asks the Handong with all his might to tell him how he can become stronger and teach him everything that the Handong himself knows. Handong is silent for a long time, and then says that Murim is not a place for children's pampering. There are people much stronger than those whom he can see. There are places where people die like flies, and he can become one of them. He asks Wu Jinbaek if he's ready for this. Jinbaek replies that it is better to die than to be unable to protect the people dear to his heart. In that case, you can call me Handong, the man tells him. A dove was flying to the Chancellor's house, and the Chancellor was already waiting for it on the terrace. There was a small message tied to the dove's foot. The Chancellor eagerly printed it out and read it carefully. It turned out to be news to him that jades were being secretly studied in Dekepsa, and he was pleased that Shinny had done something useful after all. One of the courtiers came with a report that His Majesty the King had arrived safely in the south. The Chancellor remembered the luxurious nature of the south, the huge flower meadows. He burned the letter he received and thought that it was warm and nice in the south. And it would be wonderful if the young king ended his life in the south. Jinbaek's face was distorted with tension, and sweat rolled down his face. He turned to his companion with a question. Does he have to go with a huge stone tied to him? Handong replied that without any doubt, definitely. The stone dug a deep furrow, and the end of the path was not in sight. Jinbaek no longer had any strength left. It seemed to him that a little more, and he would lose consciousness. He kept remembering the words of the Handong that in martial arts nothing happens by itself, and persistent repetition is the basis. Handong told the boy that if he wants to become stronger, then he must repeat everything he is told. He dragged a stone behind him, and remembered that in order to learn martial arts, he left his sister in the house of his friend Baekbong, and now he had to try his best, because he had nowhere to return. His mentor and teacher said that first of all, they were going to Anmunseong, because they planned to go there with their elder. Handong never received a detailed plan from his partner, but he suspects that in any case, it has something to do with Jucho. Jinbaek couldn't remember where he had heard this name. Jucho, and the Handong reminded him that Jucho held the post of Chancellor in the Kingdom of Honorable. And it was Jucho who poisoned His Majesty the late king. Jinbaek couldn't believe his ears how this could happen. The Chancellor was not always so soulless. He helped the late king and guided him on the right path. He had good relations with Surazo, His Majesty's military unit. At that time, Handong began training in Surazo and achieved great success. But one day Chancellor Jucho received an unknown bead from an anonymous donor. On the same day, the former Jucho evaporated. He began to fight with unknown methods, burning cities and villages. His power was overwhelming. From then on, he began to show a desire to control the entire world, and then he began to destroy the closest circle of His Majesty the late king. Surazo was also part of this circle. In the end, Surazo fell apart, and looking back, the Handong realizes that that bead is one of the divine jades that his senior mentor told him about. The young king is now in great danger, just like a candle in the wind. He clenched his Handong fists tightly. To deal with this, you need to reassemble and revive Surazo, one of the most loyal units to the king. Jinbaek was so tired that when the Handong told him that there were only 30 miles left to go, he felt that he could no longer walk a single step. Handong looked intently at the boy and thought that he wanted to see how long he could hold out with a huge stone behind his back. But the boy walks miles upon miles and still remains conscious. Even in a fight with a shinny, he used energy when he fired a gun. It is clear that this is an unusual boy. Finally, the Jinbaek was exhausted and fell straight to the ground. To his surprise, they had already arrived in the city and were on a street along which many people were walking. Jinbaek saw a large and beautiful city, but he lay on the ground and could not get up from fatigue. Someone's hand reached out to him to help him get up. "Are you okay?" The man who was leading a huge buffalo asked him, smiling kindly. Jinbaek has never seen people dressed like that before, and they talk so strangely. Hanmunseong has a very stable political situation and favorable location, so it is popular as a place of residence among Western foreigners. Jinbaek remembered what Handong told him. But the boy had never seen a buffalo, so he was surprised at how huge the cow was standing in front of him. Handong said that he knows where you can stay in the city, but at that moment shouts of welcome filled the street, along which an important official was riding in a palanquin. "Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor!" People shouted on the street and greeted the man in the palanquin. The mayor of Anmunsen, Mr. Yupe, also warmly greeted the residents of the city. As soon as Handong and Jinbaek were getting ready to go somewhere for lunch, an unexpected event happened. Right in front of the man with the buffalo, who helped the boy up, stood a man with firecrackers. He set firecrackers on fire, and their crackling sound deafened the entire street. How could the shooting and rattling things affect the buffalo? Of course the buffalo was scared. It reared up. From the outside it might have seemed that it was furious. Its owner could not understand what happened to the animal. The rope on which he was holding the buffalo slipped out of his hands. Even the strongest man in the world could not have held it. And the buffalo, without discerning the road, rushed off, sweeping away everything in its path to escape from those objects that frightened it so much. A palanquin with the mayor stopped right on his way. The people who were carrying it hesitated and got scared, and despite the cries of the people, the buffalo, blinded by fear, rushed towards the man. It seemed that in a few seconds everything would be over, and the mayor could no longer be saved. But then a man stood in the way of the buffalo and covered the mayor with his body. He weaved a large ball of soothing blue energy in his palms and threw it at the angry and frightened animal. This energy completely enveloped the buffalo. A second later, the animal stood absolutely peaceful and was enveloped in clouds of blue smoke. People on the street gave in. A cry of joy and bewilderment, and then rejoicing swept across the square. "Mr. Isaac has decided everything. Glory to Mr. Isaac," people shouted. Isaac asked who the owner of the animal was. The man timidly admitted. It was clear from his accent that he was a foreigner, and Isaac explained to him that animals should not be brought into places where there are so many people. The man asked for forgiveness. Jinbaek? He watched this scene. He really liked Mr. Isaac and the way he acted. He wondered why the cow was not hurt and asked, "Is this also martial arts?" And Kondun was thinking about how he ended up surrounded by the mayor. This man? Isaac approaches the mayor and asks if everything is okay. The mayor replies that everything is fine and laughs joyfully. He tells Isaac that thanks to him he can calmly go on patrol. He is very pleased that such a reliable person is helping him. Isaac modestly says that the mayor is exaggerating his merits. The mayor is leaving, and Jinbaek and Kondun look after him. Handong is very preoccupied with something. He becomes tense and thinks about something. He does not pay attention to the delight of his student, throws a bag into his hands, and sends one to the guest house. Handong himself takes off and runs as fast as he can after the mayor. Jinbaek confused. He doesn't know what he will do alone in the big city. When he opens the bag that the teacher gave him, he sees that it is full of money. The boy's mood improves sharply. He understands that while he is alone, he can do whatever he wants. Jinbaek goes into a tavern where there are a lot of people sitting and orders food for himself. The waiter brings him chicken. The boy is happy. Well-fried chicken looks very appetizing. And with wishes to myself, bon appetit, Jinbaek starts eating. An old man sits in a tavern and drinks wine with great pleasure. He is already attracting the glances of visitors who are surprised and ask what is this man doing. Opposite him sits another elderly man dressed like a monk. They have been drinking for a long time, and behind them there are many empty bottles, but they demand another. Both old men make fun of each other, and each thinks that his drinking companion is already drunk, but he is sober. Visitors to the tavern say that the men drink the day before yesterday and are surprised. How can you drink so much? An ordinary person would have died long ago. Jinbaek tried the wine for the first time. He really liked it, and he asks the waiter to bring him 2 more bottles and another chicken. At this time a stranger enters the tavern. He sits down at the table next to the drinking old men. A man orders food for himself, but there are so many orders that the hostess does not have time to serve everyone. The man waits in silence for some time for his order to be brought, but the order is not brought. Then he repeats it so loudly that one of the old men hears his voice, shudders and drops his cup of wine. It falls on the table and spills. The gray-haired old man begins to laugh at the fact that his neighbor is so awkward. He drinks his cup of wine and says that since his friend spilled everything, he is now the winner. His friend tries to justify himself that it was not his fault. Someone shouted under his arm. But to the delight of all visitors, the old man replies that there is no need to be so sensitive and flinch from every noise. The loser, like in sports, must bow to the winner 3 times and pay for drinks for a whole year. These were the terms of their dispute. An irritated old man who lost approaches the man and asks why he shouted so loudly, because people were drinking nearby. And in taverns you need to behave quietly. The man responds to this that a man in monastic robes, who is arguing over a drink in broad daylight in front of everyone, should not express dissatisfaction with excessive noise. The old man gets very angry at this remark, grabs his staff and asks the young man if he is going to die. The young man boldly answers the old man that he really not only drinks but also kills people. An old man in monastic clothes is speechless with indignation. "How dare you tease me with your dirty tongue?" he shouts, losing his temper. He swings his staff and strikes, but the young man dodges and the staff hits the table with such force that with one blow the table breaks. All the visitors look at the old man in fear and don't know what will come into his head next. And the young man takes the sword out of its sheath and tells the violent grandfather that when he pays off, let him not forget to pay for the table and for everything that will suffer due to his fault. "You know how to piss people off," says the old man. "Then blame yourself." He raises his stick. He attacks the young man with offers to try to dodge this blow too. A man parries a blow with a stick with his sword and does it very quickly and professionally. Both fighters circle each other and look for weak points in the enemy's defense. The next blow with a stick is again blocked by the sword. The owner of the tavern is crying in horror because she is afraid that everything will be broken, and people do not understand. "How could you get so drunk that you attack visitors?" A gray-haired old man. The monk's partner watches the fight with pleasure and notes that the young man has a good stance and knows how to use a sword. The sticks he holds in his hands are filled with a bluish glow of power. The fight continues. The places near the rowdies are empty. The old man suggests to the young man to give up because he looks tired, but the man is not even going to do it. Suddenly a blue light flies at him and knocks him off his feet. This stream of energy flew through the entire tavern, broke the counter in half. It happened so quickly that people didn't understand what happened. The monk angrily turns to his companion and asks what he allows himself, and the companion replies that he is joining this fun and his friend can just rest. The man squeezes the sword and realizes that these 2 old men are much stronger than he thought. You can still cope with one, but the second will be very difficult. He decides that there is only one thing left for him, and clouds of black smoke begin to envelop his figure. At this time, a voice is heard from somewhere above, calling everyone to stop immediately. Someone shouts that it is impossible for 2 to attack one, especially if a young man has a much smaller physique than an old man. This is the Jin Beck who is outraged by the injustice and shouts from the top floor that he is a master of Murim and cannot leave it just like that. 3 men who have not finished fighting look up in surprise at the unfamiliar boy, who introduces himself as a master of Murim. And all 3 have the thought, is he drunk or is he a fool? Jinbaek tries to climb over the railing, his face red from drinking wine. He can't hold on and falls down with a deafening roar. He sits among the rubble, in clouds of dust, and holds his head. He comes to his senses and cannot understand how he fell and what happened, because he does not remember anything. Since he opened his mouth, it means he is ready to answer for his words. An old man in monastic clothes approaches him menacingly. "Are you determined enough to join us in battle?" Jinbaek understands that he has no determination, and the whole situation is very deplorable for him. He is trying to remember what he did, and how he insulted this powerful old man, whose appearance shows that he is an expert. He urgently needs to escape from here, but he has no idea how to do this. His gaze falls on the large number of bottles that are on the floor, and he begins to remember who these old people are. Then, to get out, he reminds the old men that they were betting on booze, and now he's ready to argue with them. Rate is the same wine. The old people demand that the boy stop talking nonsense and immediately get to his feet. Jinbaek offers them money as collateral, which he will give if he loses. If he wins, then the young man with whom they fought will be released, and the Jinbaek will be treated like an older brother. The gray-haired old man says that if Jinbaek loses, He will have to give his life in exchange for the life of the young man. Jinbaek is not very happy about these conditions of the bet. He is trembling all over, and large amounts of sweat are rolling down his face. The monk quietly asks his friend what is he carrying, and why argue about this? And he answers that it's more fun to live this way. The monk shouts to bring the strongest drink that is only in this tavern, and the bill for everything that he broke. Jinbaek hints that it might be better to drink regular wine, but the old people say that if we argue about regular alcohol, then even 4 days will not be enough to complete this dispute. An hourglass is placed on the table, and the monk announces the terms of the dispute equal sign. The person who drinks more in 2 turns of this hourglass wins. A gray-haired old man turns to a young man who is standing in the corner with a drawn sword, and says that all this happened because of him, so he will have to become a judge in this dispute. The argument has begun, and the waiters bring huge containers of booze to the arguer. This is not the light and tasty wine that Jinbaek tried, but a strong and rough drink, whose smell alone hints at the fact that you can die if you drink it. He thinks that it's still better than fighting with these powerful old men. Besides, they were already pretty drunk before, so maybe he'll be able to win. He takes a jug and starts drinking with the thought that if he doesn't die after this, he will definitely lose consciousness. The judge monitors the execution of the rules and hears people's statements that no one could drink more than 3 glasses. Jinbaek continues to pour alcohol into himself, and it is so strong that his throat begins to burn, and 2 malicious grandfathers very quickly drank their jugs and praised this drink. In Jinbaek, and already my head is spinning, and everything is swimming in my eyes, and a fire is burning inside me. The judge notices that what from Jinbaek, and some kind of golden light begins to emanate. He understands that this is the energy of a boy, and cannot believe that he sees it with his own eyes. Old people also pay attention to what happens to the Jinbaek. They tell each other that he draws out all the strength of alcohol with his internal energy. The monk is outraged by his opponent's dishonest play. He runs up to him, calls him a coward, and shouts that it's easy to cope when you use your energy. But Jinbaek doesn't answer anything. He seems to have frozen and pours drink into his mouth. Then the monk grabs him by the shoulder and demands that he answer when he is addressed. But his hand suddenly went numb, and he realized that something was wrong. He seems to be glued to the Jinbaek and stands shrouded in golden rays of light. His friend asks in surprise what happened, and the monk replies that this boy is absorbing his energy. The gray-haired old man can't believe it. He's very surprised. He understands that he sees the law of absorption in action, which is very rare among even strong masters. He shouts to his friend to let the boy go, but his friend cannot do this, and is afraid that at this rate Jinbaek will suck all his energy. The only way to stop this and save yourself is to admit defeat, shouts the gray-haired man. The monk shouts that he has lost, so he needs to stop, and he is thrown off the table by a huge blast wave. He flies to the wall, hits it, and remains sitting absolutely exhausted. The man who judged the fight looks at the Jinbaek in surprise, and trying to figure out who this guy even is. And Jinbaek finally stops drinking. He looks around in bewilderment and asks what happened. The gray-haired man indignantly points his finger at the boy and asks if he is from Soyopa. Jinbaek has never even heard this word and does not understand what he is being asked about. The man continues to shout so that the Jinbaek does not pretend that he does not understand what he is talking about. And is his absorption magic really not the law of absorption of Soyopa? The old men consult among themselves what to do with this boy, and the monk advises to kill him. Moreover, they can do it without anyone noticing. Although he refutes himself, if this guy is connected with Soyopa, then their affairs may become more complicated. Besides, this guy may not be alone. They tell the junior that he still won the bet, and as agreed, they will release that man. And Jinbaek can call them big brothers. Jinbaek mentions that they should call him big brother according to the terms of the bet, but the old people take on such a threatening look that Jinbaek decides to agree to everything. Instantly, the old people disappear from the tavern, leaving the gentleman alone. Jinbaek doesn't understand how it happened, so he drank a lot, but he's full of energy and doesn't feel intoxicated. But he still has a headache and decides to go out for some fresh air. Jinbaek walks the streets of the city and does not understand where he went, who did not even say when he will return. He does not notice that he is constantly followed by a man in a raincoat, whom he met in a tractor. A man is trying to get attention Jinbaek, but he doesn't hear him. Suddenly, a merchant passing by accidentally pushes a man and he falls to the ground. Jinbaek turns around and recognizes the guy he saw in the tavern. Man's hat falls to the ground. Long hair hidden under a hat scatters over the shoulders. Jinbaek realizes with surprise that in front of him is a woman in disguise, and not a man as he thought. Jinbaek understands that in front of him is a young girl, his age. He is speechless in amazement, and the girl asks him how he managed to use martial arts during an argument. Jinbaek swears that he does not know any martial arts. The girl does not believe a single word he says, and believes that he is deliberately muttering this nonsense in order to deceive her. But Jinbaek continues to assure her that he is telling the truth, and she begins to believe him. After that, she loses interest in him, turns her back to him and is about to leave. She says he looks like a weakling who went where he shouldn't have, also used strange tricks. But then she stops and adds that she is grateful to the young man for helping her. The girl says that she could handle it herself, and at that time a poisonous snake crawls out of her sleeve. The girl says that the snake's name is Hyana, and if it bites someone, he will die immediately. Jinbaek doesn't understand how you can carry a poisonous snake in your bosom. Do you want to be bitten? And the snake, with its mouth wide open, pounces on Jinbaek, and who screams loudly in horror. The girl laughs loudly and says that she was joking, after which she says goodbye. Thanks again and gets ready to leave. Jinbaek stops her because he wants to know something about poisons. A girl pins up her hair to put on her hat again and pretend to be a man. Jinbaek asks her a question. If she knows something about poisons, then maybe she has heard about the denigrating sleep pills. The girl replies that she knows. These tablets are made from silkworms that turned black after eating poisonous insects. She also knows about the antidote. Jinbaek, he really needs this information, and he begs the girl to tell him in detail about everything she knows about the antidote. The girl replies that there is a special healing herb, and if you find it, you can prepare an antidote, but she does not understand what it is for. Jinbaek promises to tell her all this, but later and now he asks her to find this healing herb. The girl says that this grass grows in the mountains, and Jinbaek immediately calls her to the mountains to pick this grass. The girl begins to fear that there is a madman in front of her, explains that now it is too late to go because of this grass, and offers to meet tomorrow morning at the uphill. Jinbaek leaves because he still needs to find his teacher Handong, and the girl looks after him and thinks that it's very lucky that this boy needed an antidote. Now she can find out more about him. At this time, in a small, elegant house, illuminated by the rays of the setting sun, Isaac joyfully meets the Handong, whom he has not seen for a very long time. He invites him to come into the house and says that he was very curious to know how the fate of the Handong turned out. Handong examines the place where Isaac lives. His face is very serious. He sees that Isaac has numerous servants. The gardener is trimming the bushes by a maid. Another is sweeping the yard. Both men sit down at the table set for tea and enjoy the evening coolness. Isaac sadly says that he has already heard the news about the senior mentor of Handong. He is offended that such a smart man ended so badly. He asks what plans Handong has now, and says that he can ask the mayor to appoint Handong as head of security. Handong listens silently, and then cannot stand it and explodes. He asks Isaac what he is doing here at the very moment when their comrades from the Surazo are dying at the hands of the Jucho puppets. And Isaac lives happily, running errands for the aristocrats. Aren't you ashamed? The Handong asks angrily, and sincere indignation is written on his face. Isaac is silent for a while and then says that the world has changed, and His Majesty the King whom they accompanied also left this world. Dear friend Handong, Isaac says sadly, it's time to face the truth. The sun had already set, and the men continued their conversation. Isaac continued to say that the world has changed, and everyone should do not only what they should, but what they can. Handong doesn't understand how anyone can decide to become a puppy of the aristocrats, and what kind of choice is this for a man? Isaac replies that everything is not so simple and looks out the window thoughtfully. Handong looks in the same place as Isaac, and he sees a young, beautiful woman in the garden, taking care of flowers in the presence of a gardener. The woman notices that they are looking at her, smiles and waves her hand. Isaac says that on behalf of Surazo, he came to monitor Amundsen. He got in here like one of the soldiers. One day, during a detour, he saw a palanquin being chased by a group of robbers. Of course, he immediately rushed to the rescue, and it didn't cost him anything to destroy the bandits. When he dealt with them and approached the palanquin, he saw that the mayor's daughter was sitting there. The mayor was very grateful for saving his daughter, so he promoted Isaac, who benefited from this. After all, this way he could keep an eye on the mayor even better. But he quickly realized that the mayor is a good person who takes pity on his subjects and treats everyone equally. He showed special affection for Isaac, and when his daughter admitted that she loved the soldier who saved her, he did not send him away, but on the contrary began to talk about the wedding of young people. Isaac admitted to the Handong that he hoped, despite the fact that Jucho now has real power, if Isaac later becomes the mayor of this city, he will be able to resist Jucho. Isaac continued to tell the Handong that he needed to look at things soberly, and he would not be able to resist the Jucho with the few who remained loyal to the Surazo. Handong became very angry listening to Isaac's story. His face distorted into a grimace of impatience. He told Isaac that he was talking nonsense, and it's not him who is crooked, but Isaac should look at things soberly. If, While you are becoming an outstanding mayor, His Highness the Crown Prince dies. What will you say to our comrades who died with him? If you naively think that everything will go according to your plan, then is this not the delusion of a fool? Handong couldn't sit still, so he jumped up while giving his speech, and Isaac sat opposite him and listened attentively. Then he asked his comrade to calm down, and asked if the Khandun wanted to find out what his elder in the city was going to do. Khandun asked Isaac if he had received some kind of message from the elder, but everyone answered that this was not so, but Khandun would have to guess. The man prepared to listen carefully. You know Tek Wangan, the right hand of Jucho, right? Isaac asked. His interlocutor nodded affirmatively. So right now he is preparing to enter Anmunsen's territory. Khandun was amazed by this news. He couldn't believe it could be true. Isaac continued that Tak Wangan was going to convince the mayor to swear allegiance to him, and this can be perceived as a threat. After listening to this, the Khandun said that he had found the answer he was looking for, and he needed to leave. Isaac tried to stop him. He said that if Khandun touches Wangan now, the city will definitely be attacked. Like Anmunsen's soldier, Isaac will not sit idly by. Do what you have to do, the Handong answered him, and I will do as I decide. With these words he left. Isaac was left alone in gloomy thought and did not know what to do. Numerous tents were set up on the outer borders of Anmunsen town. The servant called his master to dinner, and Tak Wangan, the prime minister in charge of military affairs of the Han kingdom, replied that the food was bad, and when they entered the city, exquisite dishes would be waiting for him. The advisor said that we need to quickly enter the city, because after a 3-day stay the soldiers expressed their dissatisfaction. Wangan complained that he himself wanted this, but due to the fact that the lady now suddenly disappeared, there is nothing left to do except wait. All her life she had done nothing but practice martial arts. She even remained illiterate. But then the door of the tent opened and a figure appeared on the threshold. The girl who helped in the Jinbaek tavern appeared on the threshold. When asked where she had been for so long, she replied that she was looking around. She asked Wangan if he scolded her because her ears were itching all the time. Wangan replied that they would not dare. Wangan said that although this trip was approved by the girl's father, she needs to be a little more flexible, because she is very beautiful and has a wonderful figure. To have such a body and know martial arts so well, she will make a beautiful daughter of the emperor. The girl advised Wangan to keep his mouth shut, because if someone hears him calling her the daughter of the emperor, then his speech could be equated to rebellion. Wangan told his advisor that since the lady now has returned, tomorrow morning they will go to Anmunsen so that this message can be conveyed to the mayor. At this time the girl was thinking about something, and the maid was not immediately able to tear her out of her thoughts with her questions. She remembered the Jinbaek who suggested that she go to the mountains to find healing herbs. The maid saw her mistress's lips touched by a smile, and she asked that something good had probably happened, because she had not seen her owner smile for a long time. In the middle of the night, a message from Wangan was brought to the mayor's house. The mayor read it, and told the councillor that they had finally decided to enter, and we had already prepared. The mayor ordered to convey this news to everyone, and prepare the way for the guests to the castle. A Khandun sat on the roof of the mayor's house, and overheard the entire conversation. Finally he came to a conclusion and jumped off the roof. He decided that he understood what his elder wanted. He was going to kill Wangan by teaming up with Hangun. Surazo is trying to tell everyone that he is not going to sit back and ignore what is happening. Now Khandun must cope alone because his eldest died. He must take this chance and make it clear to the subjects of the Han kingdom that they are not yet subjugated. And at this time, Jin Beck was sitting on the street and crying bitterly because he could not find his brother Handong anywhere.